The mineral I chose for my discussion was iron. So for iron, the DRIs are mostly RDA values. So the RDA values are the average daily level of intake sufficient to meet the nutrient requirements of nearly 98% of healthy individuals. So the there's one AI level in the chart, and that's for infants, because there hasn't been enough research done on the amount of iron they need. So these are the values. The most relevant ones to athletes are from 14 to 15 years of age, because those are generally the ages of athletes. And of these values, vegetarians, they need to consume 1.8 times higher than those values, as I'll explain later. So iron functions in hemoglobin and myoglobin, and that's about 70% of the body's iron source. Hemoglobin is used to transport oxygen through the blood, and myoglobin is used for oxygen in the muscles. Ferritin is a protein in tissues that holds iron. So, like the average adult male, he can hold about 1,000 milligrams of iron, and that's enough for him to survive for about 3 years. But women only have about 300 milligrams, and that's only enough for us to survive about 6 months. And the last, like 6% of iron stored in the body is in proteins for key respiratory and energy metabolism. So food sources, iron can come from is consumed in two ways: from heme iron, which is found in meats and poultry and fish, and it's more biologically available to us to consume, to absorb, and non-heme, which is found in all of our like nuts, beans, grains, spinach, and that's harder for it to be biologically available. So that's why vegetarians who don't eat heme iron need to eat more non-heme iron to make up for the less biologically available use. So absorption. When you're eating a mixed diet, you only need to eat. You absorb about 14 to 18% of the iron that you consume, and the vegetarians only consume about or absorb about 5 to 12% of all the iron they consume, and that's because it's non-heme iron, but it's also because there are inhibitors in like vegetables, like called phenols, and calcium is also an inhibitor. So spinach, even though it's like extremely high in iron, has a lot of phenols in it too, which prevent the absorption. But there are also enhancers. So vitamin C, like obviously found in our citrus fruits, helps increase absorption, and absorbic acid, which is found in a lot of meats, helps absorb, helps increase absorption. So deficiencies, the people that are generally at risk are infants, young children, teenage girls, pregnant women. And so in pregnant women, Mexican Americans and non-Hispanic black women are more likely to be deficient than other equivalent like white women, white not European women. And also premenopausal women are also at risk. So there are 3 stages of deficiency. So in the U.S., iron deficiency is actually very common, but it's not iron deficiency alone. Like usually people will be iron deficient with like a vitamin C deficiency too, or an iron deficiency with like some other sort of vitamin or nutrient missing. So the first stage is iron depletion, and that's when just the ferritin concentrations and iron in bone marrow decreases, and that's kind of hard for people to detect. And then there's iron deficiency erythropoiesis, and in that the hemoglobin levels are staying normal, but the iron stores are completely depleted. But you don't know that really if you take a blood test. And then in the final iron deficiency anemia, which is also called IDA, hematocrit and levels of hemoglobin decline because that's the last source of iron, and the red blood cells become smaller. And so IDA is defined as a hemoglobin level that's lower than 2 standard deviations of the mean of a healthy population. So that's pretty much like eliminating like almost, I think it's like 68% of the population. Actually, it's more, some percent of the population. So for athletes, people who are at risk for deficiencies are obviously female because they menstruate and they lose a lot of iron through the menstruation. Vegetarians who have more difficulty absorbing iron, and distance runners. And it's distance runners because iron is lost through sweat. So obviously, distance runners are running for a long amount of time and easily sweat, so they lose a lot of iron that way. Toxicity. Toxicity, like reaching a toxic level of iron naturally, is very, very difficult. Most common situations of toxicity is supplements. When a supplement of 45 milligrams per kilogram or more falls into like the hands of a child and the child eats it, it can kill them. It can cause severe brain damage, but doing it naturally is very difficult to consume that much iron. And there's also hemochromatosis, and that's a genetic disorder that occurs in 4.4 of 1,000 white Europeans. And it's a result of excessive buildup of iron in the body, and that can cause liver damage, and it can be like stalled and treated, but not cured. So for my article, I chose iron supplement effect on mood, physical performance, and iron status in women who are entering the basic training of the Army. So the procedure was an 8 weeks randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of 171 female soldiers. So they entered basic training for 8 weeks. And the reason they chose basic training for 8 weeks is because previous studies have shown that women entering basic training have found like decreasing levels of iron throughout, like from the beginning to end. So they thought this was a great way to study them. So they studied iron levels in their blood, in their hemoglobin, in their red blood cells, in their ferritin. They measured mood, and they measured performance on a 2-mile run. So the result from the research was that there wasn't a change in women they broke up the groups and the people into 2 groups. There were people with normal iron levels when they entered. There were people with iron deficiencies when they entered, and then there were people with iron deficiency anemia. So the only people who saw an increase in their 2-mile time run were the women who received the iron supplements that were IDA. And they saw an actual 110 seconds average increase in their 2-mile time runs. And the mood, they also saw a significant improvement of mood in women who received the supplements compared to those who didn't. And they used the POPOMS method to measure that. And then iron status, the iron supplements increased red blood cell width, which you can see is the symbol RDW, for those who received the treatment. The transferrin receptors were elevated, which are the proteins that hold iron. And they also saw that it's decreased the amount of iron that women were losing throughout the 8 weeks. This is the chart that shows the increase in time of those who received the supplements. So you can see the IDA deficient woman 2-mile times significantly increased while they received the supplements compared to those who didn't, and who were IDA. So the scores on the Vigor test, on the Vigor subscale of the POMS, increased substantially more in iron-treated volunteers compared to those who were receiving placebo. So what that was just saying is that the moods of the women were increased compared to the women who didn't receive the iron treatment. They also saw that the iron supplements could slow the decline in iron status in the woman during basic training camp. But they also showed told us that PALM scores, which measured the mood, could also have been influenced by vitamin C deficiencies, and those hadn't been measured during the study. The researchers said that they would like to see women with IDA and IDA deficiencies be identified before they enter basic training, and that those women should be given supplements and education on iron nutrition. And they said that this is because this would help improve their performance in basic camp and in the field after they graduate basic camp.